In this exercise, we're going to take a look at one of the uses of the offset function. The offset function is a very versatile function in Excel, and we will use it a lot. It allows us to look at tables of data in a very efficient way. So what we have for exercise is a maker's example. We're going to set up a salvage value calculator. We'll work on this a little bit more later on. I've got everything on the same worksheet here so you can work with it. If you don't have this layout, you're going to want to pause the video and lay things out. Focus on this area here. Don't worry about the instructions up above. Those are just for your use in this video to kind of learn the syntax of the offset function. So go ahead and pause the video if you don't have this workbook and lay your video out. Be careful to put things in the correct cells, otherwise the references that I use won't match yours and that could be confusing for you. All right, we have some instructions here down at the bottom. If you look down, I'll walk you through this exercise step by step. First thing we want to do is set the data validation here in B7 so that the user can select the maker's class from the maker's table that he or she wants to use. So here are the maker's classes. So we want to set this so that they can select from that list of classes. So we'll use data validation. I'm not going to put in any error messages. Just going to move along fairly quickly here. I'm going to set the list then. And for the list, I want these 4 values, 3, 5, 7, and 10. All right, and that sets it so that we have 3, 5, 7, and 10. I'll just put 5 in for us to work with. Now we want to set the data validation for cell B9 right here to provide a list of available years based on the maker's class selected in B4. Now this is the first time we're going to use the offset, and we have to use it a little blind here. We have to use it in the data validation list box, and we don't get any of the helps, so I'll walk you through the elements of the offset function. The first piece of syntax is the reference. In other words, what cell does this list of values start in? Then once we're at that cell, do we want to move any rows off of that or any columns off of that? And at this point, we're not using the offset function that way, so we're going to set these 2 to 0. We're going to stay at the reference. But we are indicating a range of values, and our range is going to have a specific height. It's going to be 1 cell wide, but we're going to want our range to be a height that gives us the number of years in the particular maker's class. So, for example, if maker's class 5 is selected, we want 6 years, 1 through 6. See, there are 6 years of depreciation in maker's class 5, 4, and 3, 8, and 7, and 11, and 10. So we'll go ahead, go to data validation, and select list. Then we're going to use the offset function, so equals offset. Now the first thing it wants to know is, where do we start? Well, we're always going to start here in cell J9, and notice that's absolute and that's fine. Next, comma, we're going to stay there, so we're not going to move any rows, comma, we're not going to move any columns. Now, how high do we want this? Well, the user has already told us which maker's class they're using maker's class 5. For each of the maker's classes, there's always 1 more year. So what I want the system to do is to go up and see which maker's class the user has selected, then add 1 to that. That's how high I want this range to be. Then it's going to be 1 column wide. And there we go. I'll say OK. Now we should have 1 through 6, sure enough. And if we selected Makers Class 3, we should have 1 through 4. Yeah, so our dynamic list is working. It's watching to see which Makers Class the user selects, and it's giving us the list of years in which we could salvage the asset that conform to the Makers Class that was selected by the user. All right, the next thing we have to do is a little bit similar. We need to create a list of years here that grows and shrinks based on the Makers Class that's selected. So what we need to do is just go in and tell this column which year we're using. So for example, if our value here, which is going to be absolute, the Makers Class that's selected, let's start with 3. If it's greater than or equal to 3, we'll go ahead and we'll just use this. We could type it in, but we'll just point to our table. We'll use that value there. If it's greater than or equal to 3, we want to show a year 1 here, and we're going to have a year 1 all the time. Otherwise, we want it to be a blank. Now that's going to be true for all of the years that appear in Makers Class 3. So I'm going to copy that down to year 4. Now at year 5, it's going to change. So what I want now is to type in if. Then I want to look up here at the Makers Class the user selected, and I want to see if it's greater than or equal to 5. So for all Makers Classes 5 and above, year 5 is going to appear. And if in fact it is, then I want to go over here and get this year and put it in the list, otherwise a blank. And that will be true for years 5 and 6. Those are the 2 years that appear when the Makers Class is set to at least 5 years. Then, write my if function again. I'll look up here, see what's selected, make it absolute, and I'll see if it's greater than or equal to 7. That would be the next Makers Class. If it is, I want to go over here and get this value. If it isn't, blank. And that would apply to years 7 and 8, wouldn't it? You can't see them because this is set to 5. We'll just leave it like that. And then finally, if the Makers Class value that we selected is greater than, oh, or equal to 10. We only have 10, but we might have more. Let's make that equal to instead of plus 10. Then we'll go over here and get 9 appears for the first time here, otherwise blank. And we'll copy this down. Okay, we'll test it. We'll change this to Makers Class 7. 7 and 8 appear. We'll change this to Makers Class 10. 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. Change this back to Makers Class 3. All right, we have our lists populating correctly. The next step then, we want to make this smart year label, set it so that it indicates the Makers Class year. Well, that's easy enough. We'll just take this year value up here. In fact, I'll just type it in. I want equals, and I'll go get the Makers Class, and then space, ampersand, space, and then in quotes, I'll put a dash and then the word year, and then close quotes for text. And there you go. I'll have always the correct Makers Class value in there so that we have a good label. All right, once I have this, then I can go ahead and get the percentages for the corresponding Makers Class. I'll get the percentage that needs to go here so that then I can calculate the depreciation amount. And to do that, we'll use the index and match functions. So we'll dial it back a little bit to a previous lesson. What I want to do here is first I want to check to see if this period is in use. And since my year column is populated when the period is in use, I'm going to look to my year column to see if it's blank. If it's blank, I'm going to make it blank. If it's not blank, I'm going to use my index function, where the first thing it wants to know is the array. Well, here's my array. Here are all the values I want it to look up. I'm going to make that absolute. Here's my table. Now it wants to know the row in that array. So I'll use the match function for that. And what I want to do is just take a look over here at the year that I'm in. Then I want to go ahead and go to the year column, and I can't quite get there, so I put my cursor there and arrow down one and hold down my shift key and select that whole column. I want to make that absolute because I want to copy this, and then it's going to be an exact match. All right, so that will get me on the right row that the user has selected. Then I'll use the match function again. Look up. This time I want to look up the maker's class that the user selected. I need to make that absolute. Where do I look that up? Well, I look that up across here, and that will give me the appropriate number, the number of the appropriate column. Make that absolute, and it's going to be an exact match. Then I close off my match function and close off my index function and close off my if function, press enter, and I have 20%. Good. I'm going to just copy this all the way down to year 11, and I'm going to check. Here's year 5. Here are my values, and they're good. So let's just verify that. Year 7. Yeah, those look good. Year 3. Year 10. Good. It's all working. Then I want to go ahead and calculate the amount of depreciation for each year. So this is pretty straightforward. First of all, we're going to check to see if the year's in use. If it equals a blank, then we're going to put a blank in here. If not, we're going to just go up to the asset's value, make that absolute, and we'll multiply that times the maker's depreciation allowed for that period, and press enter. That will give us our amount. I'll just double click, it'll fill down. And we can see that now we've created our maker's depreciation table for our different asset classes. And finally, I've done all of this so that I can calculate the book value of an asset that I'm going to sell before I've fully depreciated it. What we want to do is we want to know when we salvage this, how much depreciation we've paid or applied to this asset so that we can get the book value of our asset. So we're going to assume here that when we say maker's year salvage, that we salvage at the end of that year. So we will have applied year 4's depreciation. So what we want to do if we were doing this manually is we'd want to add up years 1, 2, 3, 4's depreciation, and then subtract that from our asset's original value, and that would give us the book value of our asset. So we're going to use the sum and the offset function to do that. We're going to use offset to create a scalable range within the sums function. So let's just walk through that. We're going to use the if function. First of all, we want to make sure that a maker's year salvage has been selected. Otherwise, we'll get an error message. So if that's blank, we're just going to put in a blank. Next, we're going to go ahead and take our original value of the asset, and we'll subtract from that. We use the sum function. What we want to do is create a scalable range in the sum function. So we'll use the offset function, And we're going to always start right here with our first amount. We're not going to move. We're using the offset to create a range, not find a value. So we'll go past those two and we'll go to the optional pieces of syntax that allow the offset function to create a range. We want to know how high that range is. Well, in this case, we know the user's telling us how high the range is. Here is saying 4. We want to include 4 years. Now, if we were doing this at the beginning of the year, then we subtract 1 from that. But we're assuming that we've applied year 4's depreciation to this asset. And we want our range to be 1 wide. So that gives us our offset function, and we'll close off our sum function. We'll close off our if function, and we get a book value of 14,450. And if we were to take, let's just show it here. There's our value. Now let's do a sum. We're doing it in year 4, so here's 1, 2, 3, 4. We get that, and then if we did equals that minus that, you can see we get 14,450. So our offset function used to set the range for the sum function is working just as it should. That would allow us to go ahead then and maybe we want to sell that at the end of year 3 or at the end of year 2 or at the end of year 5, whatever you want to do. That is how you use the offset function to identify a range of values.